Hello, I'm Marcus Ward from Wild New Forest, and I'm going to talk to you this evening about hawfinches in the New Forest. Before we get going through the field work, I'm going to talk a little bit about background of hawfinch in the forest, or hawfinch in the UK, in fact. So this first slide here shows just the previous two BTO breeding bird atlases that have been published. The first there on the left in 1968 to 1972, by comparison to the recent one from 2008 to 2011. There you can see a clear reduction in numbers of breeding records across the UK between the two atlas periods. And notably, in the 2008 to 2011 survey, sort of concentrations of birds remaining there, particularly the New Forest, Forested Dean, North Wales and South Lakes. So on the back of this, the breeding bird atlas that was published in 2008 or 2011, the RSPB called a meeting to look at the situation with hawfinch in the UK, and so I attended that meeting back in, I can't remember when it was, 2011, 2012. And what became apparent was how little we sort of knew and understood about hawfinch in the UK. Particularly in my patch, which is the New Forest. It's a species that I've been around, that always seems to be around, but I hadn't really taken all that much notice of, just beyond logging the occasional nest and so on. And so it's prompted a lot of questions in my mind as to what's going on with hawfinch. And it was apparent that, as I said, that we didn't have a good understanding of hawfinch in the UK. So that's kind of the catalyst for me getting involved with hawfinch, just over 10 years ago now. So just a bit of context, the importance of the New Forest for hawfinch. So going back to previous population estimates in 1993, as you can see there, population estimate was 3,000 to 6,500 pairs for the UK. Rolling forward to 2013, Rob Clements produced a population estimate stating there between 500 and 1,000 pairs in the UK. So it's quite a reduction in a relatively short period of time. At that time, a lot of that data was based on some of the remaining strongholds. So at that time, the New Forest we had down as 200 pairs. Now, based on what we've been doing over the last decade, we know now that actually that's more like 350 pairs in the New Forest. And so those figures for the Wye Valley and Forested Dean and Meredith below are possibly low as well. But either way, what's highlighted is for one thing, the population in the UK has declined quite dramatically, and also that the New Forest, along with just a handful of other places, remains an important stronghold for hawfinch in the UK. So monitoring hawfinches, I've been monitoring roosts right from the beginning. So when we had that first meeting back in 2012 or whenever it was, there was a well-known hawfinch roost at Blackwater Arboretum, which is still active and has been recorded back to the 1980s as an active roost. And I'd found one or two other places that I thought were roosts in the forest. And so that piqued my interest, because hawfinches are a tricky species, as we all know. They're really hard to get to grips with. They're quite elusive. They're quite quiet, quite subtle. Their nesting is an absolute pain, because they nest quite late in the season once the bud burst once the leaves have burst out, and nests can be hard to find. They're a quiet species. So yeah, just generally tricky. So one way I figured of recording all the hawfinches in one place at one time was at the roost, and so I set about monitoring the roosts. So rolling forward to today, I found 50 roosts across the New Forest, and 3 just outside the New Forest. So I monitor these roosts year round. There's 3 roosts that I monitor monthly year round, and the rest I try to do once a year, because it's just too many now. With 50 roosts, too many to do them all the time. But trying to understand the roosts is really important. So for one thing, the roosts are used at different times, so they're used all year round. Some roosts are busier in the winter months. Other roosts are used exclusively during the spring and summer months. Other roosts are used year round. They're all slightly different. We've got different types of roosts, 3 or 4 different types of roost. But what they have in common really is largely that they're in soft conifers. In the New Forest, it's in Douglas fir and spruce. We have 1 or 2 in holly. and also a couple that are in ivy on oak. And I presume that these in holly and ivy on oak are where hawfinch would have roosted prior to the arrival of these non-native conifers that we have across the New Forest now. There's a few other things that they have in common, that they're often on the edge or close to an open area, or an area that's recently been clear felled. There's sort of an open aspect to them. They're all pretty much sheltered with an easterly aspect, and that's because our prevailing wind conditions are from the southwest here in the New Forest, and so that makes sense that they're sheltered from the prevailing wind direction. And we find that when the wind does change to an easterly, it messes up the roosts. So in fact, I stopped counting roosts when we've got an easterly, because it's just hard to gauge where the birds are going to be roosting. And they have these large gathering trees. As you can see, this is in the image here. This is a classic New Forest hawfinch roost. This is one down near Burley, and you can see there a big prominent conifer in the middle. And these conifers, normally there'd be 2 or 3 similar trees across the roost that they used to gather in, both pre and post roost. They'll always gather in the same tree, and they're often at the heart of a colony as well. So that's the other thing. So they're often close by an area where they nest colonially quite frequently. And so during the summer, what will often happen is the roost stays active, but not as busy, so that the females stay on the nest all the time throughout the cycle, but the males will come off and roost in their communal roost. Not exclusively, we've found, but quite frequently they use the roost. So this is a typical roost down in the southwest of the forest, down near Burley. So zooming in, you can see one of those prominent trees. This is typical in the morning of up to about 15 hawfinches gathering here, and they'll do this in a cycle, gather in small numbers in the morning, have a little chatter with one another, and then head off to feed for the day. I monitor the roosts 30 minutes either side of sunrise. So I get on site 30 minutes before the advertised sunrise time, record all the relevant conditions, and map the time and direction of birds going off or out of roost, and map specific roost site locations. And then I also at the same time record all other species using the roost. So most of the roosts aren't just exclusively hawfinch. We also have a range of finches using the roost, predominantly siskins, chaffinches, crossbills, when they're around, bramblings, and that sort of thing. And also I record other potential predators or raptors in the area. So a lot of our roosts in the forest seem to be shared or close by goshawk nest sites, which is an interesting common theme, which is possibly down to, I wonder, it's probably partly a quirk of the conditions that the goshawk's roosts are sheltered. So nest sites are sheltered, but also possibly that the goshawks play a role in removing some other potential pest predators from the area, like jays and jackdaws in particular. Okay, so I'll just move on through. We've only got 15 minutes for the talk, so I'll move through fairly rapidly. So this is just an overview of all the roost sites that we have mapped in the New Forest. All the red dots are roosts that are active, that I'm monitoring. The blue dots are areas where I'm pretty sure there's a roost, but I haven't quite nailed it yet. So they take a bit of work to pin down the actual roost sites. Some of these may turn out not to be roosts, but that's where I believe there is a roost. But it's sort of like a work in progress, as it were. So I think we've almost got complete coverage for the forest. There's probably maybe another 4, 5, 6 roosts to find to cover the forest. Okay, so in addition, we do a bit of colour ringing to determine what's going on with hawfinch. So we partake in an RAS scheme, a BTO RAS scheme, where we have baited sites across the New Forest. So we bait sites using sunflower seed coming out of an automated feeder that drops on the ground, attracts in hawfinches, and then we use a whoosh net to cover, to catch the hawfinches. We have extra bait stations where we rig up with trail cameras, so high resolution trail cameras, so that as the hawfinches come in to feed, we can record their colour ring. So we're constantly recording birds coming and going, and that helps us better understand how movements across the forest, how different colour-ringed birds move. Turns out they don't move very far. Most of them don't move really any distance at all. We have 2 bait stations that are 600 meters apart, and we've had very little movement between even those 2. We do the ringing mainly from March through to July, when natural resources are at the lowest ebb. So this is just a picture, just so you can picture how the bait station looks. So that's the feeder hanging up in the tree, spits out seed onto the ground, where we catch the birds using a whoosh net. This is just an image here of a colour-ringed hawfinch. So currently all of our colour-ringed hawfinches have a yellow ring with a 2-digit code on them, and so they're easily picked up as they come down to the bait stations. So something else we've been doing is looking at foraging behaviour. So using GPS and radio tracking, looking at what hawfinches are feeding on. So we've done 2 rounds now with 10 lightweight GPS and radio tags. So it's a radio tag that emits a radio frequency, so we can track it, but also has GPS capability, so that it's recording a location once every 20 minutes on our tags. The tag's designed to fall off after about a month, when we use the radio receiver to track down and locate the tag once it's fallen off, to retrieve it and download the data. So what we're doing, we're tagging males during the breeding season. So as the female sits on the nest, the male does the foraging for the nest. So what we're looking at is what they're feeding on, and that's obviously the peak time where the male's not only getting food for itself, it's getting food for the female and for the young on the nest. So it's trying to get a better feel for what's going on. So this is just very quickly, this is an overview of our tagging 10 birds that we tagged in 2019, just to give you an idea of the spread and distribution of these birds. They're all tagged where the red cross is in the top center of the map, but then each different color is a different bird and its movements. So I could talk all day about all of these, but I've just picked a few just to highlight, because we're tight for time, so we'll just talk about 3 individuals. So this is the first one, IP. Sharp-eyed ones there will notice that the colouring is actually DN, but we put a new colouring on when we tagged this individual. So this male was tagged on the 26th of April 2019. I should say here that we targeted specific individuals. So we didn't just randomly tag males that turned up and were the right weight. We targeted individuals that we knew were locals or were regulars to the bait station, because we felt it was easier. We stood a better chance of retrieving the tag of regulars. We did just as a control. We did 2 previous unringed males each time, just to check their movements, just as a control. But the data we're generating, we're talking about here, is from birds that we know. So this tag was only on this bird for 2 weeks, and here at the bottom of the image, it looks very busy, but these are the movements. And so down in the bottom right by the red dot is where the tag was put on. And interesting, when we were radio tracking, all we had while we were radio tracking is in this area, Bratley enclosure. This is the big concentration of dots. It was only when we retrieved the tag that we found out that this individual had been moving up to the northeast to a little small clump of hollies. We had no idea it was going there. We didn't pick that up on the radio tracking. So it's fascinating. So this bird actually had a nest. We worked out, we actually pretty much found the nest in Bratley enclosure. But what was interesting, it was spending most of its time in Bratley enclosure, which is an oak plantation. And it was foraging in there pretty much all day, but at dawn and at dusk, or at the beginning and at the end of the day, it would move up here to these hollies. It's just a little group of hollies where it would feed, sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for over an hour. And there's nothing there. I've been up there quite a few times. It's just a pure stand of hollies with a U in the middle. And here you often have hawfinches feeding on the ground, and what they're feeding on here is holly seeds. So holly seeds coming out of the berry. So what's interesting, what we can surmise from this is that the adult is feeding in Bratley enclosure on invertebrates, collecting invertebrate food for the nest, and then going to feed on holly seeds pre and post roost for self-sustenance. So this is just a quick view showing the images of both Bratley enclosure, the nest site, and Fritham Cross, where it was going to feed in the hollies. This is our next bird, LH. It's just a quick video clip of LH at the nest. This is the female, unringed and untagged female, but this is LH coming in from the right just to feed the chicks. So with the use of the tags, it also helps us just find the nest. So this nest had 4 chicks, all successfully fledged, which is great news. Off it goes. So here, this is interesting data. So the red cross on the map is where the nest was. The red dots are where LH roosted. And what we found is LH spent most of the day feeding in Bratley Enclosure and Bratley Arch, which are 2 areas of largely oak with a bit of beech. But then it would move across dawn and dusk, similar to the previous bird, into a holly home. And this was a holly with a few Scots pine and a couple of yews, where it would feed dawn and dusk in a similar way to IP, which is fascinating. So we're getting a theme here from these hawfinches. But as with everything, I'll just finish on KX, which threw everything out the window. So KX was ringed like the others, tagged up at Boulderwood. But here on the map, every cross is somewhere where I tracked, or we tracked KX with the radio tracker, and he was recorded singing. So in each of these positions, so in Bratley Enclosure, in Markash Wood, and all the way down even in Wilverley, this individual was recorded singing. So this threw everything out the window, because normally if I was out in the field recording these singing birds, it would be, I'd mark that as a potential breeding site. But yes, this scuppered. So it just goes to show, as soon as you start to get a theme and a pattern, there's always one individual that throws it out. So we're learning a lot, but there's still an awful lot to learn. Right, just a little bit about Wild New Forest. We're a small not-for-profit organisation operating in the forest, and I'm happy to take any questions at the end if anybody has any. Apologies for running 2 minutes over.